Hey, what's up, everyone? Morey here, and we have another great episode of the Morey Miles podcast. This is going to be episode 11. It's going to be with speed coach Ian Walker out of North Carolina. I ended up reaching out to Ian because I was going through all the different 40-yard dashes with the receivers and just looking at the different technique, and I came across a athlete that had some great technique and thought I would go through and really try to find out who coached him, who helped him out, just to be able to connect for a podcast, be able to talk a little bit about sprinting and technique, and just be able to get some more information for you guys to be able to help you guys out in your sprinting journey. We talk about a lot of different things when it comes to speed programming, the difference between strength and speed. We go into technique, specifically with the actual athlete that I ended up reaching out to him because of. A lot of great information for anybody that's looking to learn a little bit more about how to get faster. So we'll go ahead and hop right into the episode. How did you get into coaching originally? And yeah, just give us a little bit more about your story.
My name is Ian Walker. I am a speed and sport performance coach based here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Got started into coaching as a track and field coach. So I've been a sprints coach for track and field this is my 9th year. And I've been in the sports performance, strength and conditioning space for about 6 years now. As far as my background athletically, I've been playing sports for as long as I can remember. Primarily, I grew up playing basketball, football, and then as I got into middle school, learning track. And we did that all the way through high school. In college, I wasn't able to get going. I suffered some knee injuries in high school that kind of kept me from really competing at a high level. So I just wasn't able to get things back in order for me to be able to do so, but just stayed around athletics, and the majority of my friends were athletes. I was just interested in it, so even through college, just kind of in the environment. And after college, I actually went a completely different route. I was in the nonprofit space and did a lot of overseas missionary work for 10 years, but even some local community work. I ran a community center for low-income communities, and we ran a music school, different things like that. And then I got into coaching as a volunteer. So actually, my daughter is the reason I got into coaching.
That's awesome.
She was invited out to a track team by one of her friends with a summer club track team. And so as a way to kind of just build our relationship and have one of those things that was ours, I take her to practice all the time. While she was practicing, I'd be out there and just trying to work out or jog and use my time. Just talking with the coaches, they eventually asked me to come on board and help out. And prior to that, I had no interest or really thought that I could be a coach or wanted to be a coach. And as I got into it, I really enjoyed it. Just working with the kids, being in the sport, and it just continued to develop. It's one of those things where I just dove deep with the desire to help the kids that I was working with. We were a track club that was we worked from ages 8 to 18 years old. So it was youth sports. And it was cool to be able to I think, have that wide range of age ranges that I could work with, because I could help kids at a basic level with the fundamentals of running technique and learning the sport of track and field. And as progressively as they got older, become more advanced and even have some of those who had opportunities to go to the next college. But my work in that space with club track, we were affiliated with AAU and USA Track and Field in the summer. Those types of things. I worked there to an opening in the sports performance space. So for the facility that was being built out called Parisi Speed School, which
That's pretty popular.
yeah, it's like a franchise, especially up north in New Jersey where it started. It's very popular up there. But we were the first in this area, I think maybe the third in the state of North Carolina. So there wasn't anything like it for at least a couple hours around us. So I started there back in 2016, early 2017. And it was something that I really ate up. And I think it was, honestly, I think I really enjoyed it. I was drawn to it because of my own previous hardships with my knee injuries in high school. And so it was a space where I could continue to really mentor, work with kids, kind of pour in and invest into them, but also just help kids grow and develop physically, but also as just individuals, and to be able to see as kids got stronger, as kids got faster, they got more confident, they started to develop leadership skills, different things like that, and to see how it would roll over into family life, school, just continue to create more opportunities for them and their families as they graduating and so forth, that was just a driving force for me. And so it was really cool to jump into that. After about probably 6 months, I became the director of that facility.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you were kind of a natural coach then, huh? Like when you first started, it was like once you were given the opportunity, it was like, okay, this is something I want to do.
Yeah, I had no clue. Like when I was younger, I never would have thought that I would be a coach. And I think my 10 years in doing missions work, I did a lot of like community and mentorship work. I think my experience there for that period of time enhanced what I've been able to do as a coach. And for me, coaching is a large part of it. Sometimes I think it's overlooked is the relational part of how you're able to communicate and connect with the athletes. And I feel like that's what's helped me to continue to grow in my craft, but really to see success with the athletes. I think not necessarily that I'm doing anything groundbreaking with them. Maybe some stuff is not as that a lot of people are doing what I'm doing, but I don't think I'm doing anything that's just real incredibly cutting edge. I just think that I'm able to connect with the athlete. I'm able to build trust with them and just communicate in different ways and they can grasp what I'm trying to get out of them and the goals that we have for them and it's effective. And I think I can get the most out of an athlete.
I love that. And there's so many things to go off of from there. But yeah, I mean, to be able to, so first thing, because I think that it's so important as well to be able to have the great relationships with athletes. And when, I mean, being a director, I'm sure, and also just being in this, working with other trainers, seeing other trainers on social media, things like that. Where do you feel like a lot of coaches might miss in terms of building up that relationship or being able to connect with an athlete in a way that, I mean, you've seen yourself be able to differentiate in that way? Because we all have our own things that I think end up being cutting edge, right? Quote unquote cutting edge. So going back to the question, how do you build that relationship with the athletes that you are training with, and what do you see coaches kind of miss in that area?
Well, I feel like it's different for different coaches. Having been a director, I had to hire other coaches to be on staff and place them in certain roles and things. But I think with younger coaches, everything is new and kind of have that excitement and desire to want to get athletes to do everything that you're learning and to experiment, to explore. So sometimes I think you can move too fast as a younger, inexperienced coach, and sometimes moving too fast and not having developed yet maybe a skill of effective communication can kind of with the athlete can start to develop a little bit of uneasiness and maybe a little bit of a lack of trust there. And so I think that hesitancy creates a little bit of a wall between the coach and the athlete. And so that hinders the development there. And I think sometimes with older coaches like myself, working with...
You're definitely not an older coach. I would not say you're an older coach.
I think I'm older than I look, but working with youth athletes, sometimes like I it's just times are different. And I come from a different generation. How my coaches were when I was active in high school and middle school, how they communicated with us will not work today. And sometimes it's hard to adjust.
Did it work for you though too? Did it work when you were coming up? Because I know for me personally, I don't think it worked necessarily for me very well either. I have more of a football background, and I grew up in California, then went to Kansas and played football in Kansas, and the way they communicated there just did not get the most out of me. Did not motivate me. So
I can't say that it was probably the most effective means of communication for me. Sometimes I probably flew under the radar with coaches just because I was fast and I was talented, so they probably left me alone sometimes and just let me do what I was supposed to do. Yeah. But I definitely feel like I could have learned more. There was more that I could have experienced, learned, and accomplished. Coaching strategy was a little bit different for sure.
Yeah. I know that ends up being definitely, I think better in our generation, or now that coaching is getting a little bit more advanced, is I think everybody's getting more knowledgeable on what it is that, especially from a sports performance side. I do think that in general, the track and field at large is a very underserved community of young and up and coming athletes, which is really unfortunate. Just like put the blocks kind of out there and show them how to get in the stance, and you do 3 reps before your meet the next day, or 5 reps or whatever, and then it's good luck. Should be so much more resources that are put in for these athletes to be able to succeed. I think there's a lot of potential within the LA area or probably the US at large in terms of athletes that could end up competing at a international level. But I think a lot of them end up kind of fading off because they don't have any of the right resources. So I'm definitely very motivated to be able to try to help out as many people as I can to help them improve or help them get the information they need to be able to succeed. So yeah, I mean, I guess going a little bit more into that. So when you first started with the Parisi Speed School, is that one of like the main education that I guess you used to learn more about sprinting, or like what was your main education for helping you in understanding how to coach athletes?
So prior to Parisi, actually working with the track club, I started out as an assistant sprint coach, and the primary sprint coach was a guy by the name of Eric Williams. He's been training athletes for years, and he's very much a teacher and really detailed, and would just cared enough to explain everything he was wanting to do and why, the why behind the what. He just was sharing just a wealth of information with me, and that just continued to kind of sparked my interest to do some research on my own. So guys like Dan Path, Lauren Seagrave, just various like track coaches who were those who I would find YouTube videos of them coaching or doing seminars, or I would just find literature to read, and the USATF certifications, starting to pursue those. And as I transitioned into the sports performance space, BC has its own certification that it requires. The performance coaches, it's a certification that you take a test online. You have to go and do like an in-person training. They have like a big one that's a week long, and then they have some regional ones that are like 2 or 3 days. And I learned a ton from that, not just about speed, but definitely a lot about speed, because that was our primary thing. We're the speed school, so helping athletes get faster, and that was big for me to not just see things from a track and field side, but how teaching and helping athletes develop their speed, but it's applicable to all sports. And so that was huge for me to then want to pursue more and to begin studying for CSCS, and just finding other resources online that I could pull from. And so a lot of mine wasn't my education in that sense, was a bit non-traditional. I think I was fortunate to be able to have access to YouTube, but not just find anybody who's posting content, but to really find some solid, reputable sources that I could learn from and study and hear from, and then be in a space like Parisi where I can then come and begin to apply those things and see them work, and then just sharpen myself and see where I fall short as a coach, on whether it's coaching cues or the energy that I bring to the session, or it is to just continue to grow in that. So I think just being able to have literature, have videos, and those mentors that weren't necessarily face to face, but kind of mentored me from a distance. Yeah, and then being able to apply that day after day, probably working with, at the time of getting started, I probably worked with at least 30 athletes a day, with groups and maybe a couple of individuals. I think that just helped me sharpen their skills and continue to grow in knowledge as I just continue to get the reps, and then just to try to always come back and evaluate my own coaching habit and style and things like that, for sure.
And within your clientele and the athletes that you work with, I mean, because I know the reason that I stumbled upon your stuff, as we talked about, and maybe we can get into some of that. I'm pretty sure as a wide receiver who was running the 40, and the technique was just like, man, I love all the different parts of it. The start looked good, the drive phase, the top end speed. It was a lot aligned with what it is that I coach, and led me to like look into, and I did this with a few different people to see like who's getting coached by these people, and then I came across you and was just really liked the energy, really liked some of the stuff you're putting out on social media, so that's what made me reach out to you. So kudos in all those regards. But yeah, I mean, do you mostly work with like track and field athletes? Do you mostly work with football players, baseball players? I mean, what's like the vast majority of athletes that you train?
So it's been kind of interesting over the past 6 years or so. Just it seems to like ebb and flow of the different athletes that I work with. Largely, I mean, I'm still a crowd coach, so I work with track athletes regularly, but in the gym, largely, I think it's been football and soccer athletes primarily. If I look up my whole span of coaching, but I've worked with baseball, basketball, lacrosse. I had an Irish dancer that I was working with for a while, tennis athletes, volleyball athletes. So that's been great just to have that diversity and to be able to change it up, and it keeps it interesting for myself. Right now, I'm in a I guess the time that I'm in right now, I have a lot of basketball athletes that I'm working with.
Getting into some of the things that you train when it comes to the different phases or the parts of sprinting. And I guess the first question is like, what do you feel like the most comfortable with? Like if you were going to go in and isolate the different parts of sprinting, would it be a little bit more of like the start, a little bit more top end speed? Do you feel pretty comfortable with everything, or?
I think now I'm pretty comfortable with everything. I think initially the kind of the start and kind of the acceleration phase of things was what I was most comfortable with. I coached it more. It was more applicable to everybody that I came across. And I feel like, or at least with the way that I was communicating, it was easier for athletes to grasp and then to apply and start to see results as I got into more top end speed with athletes, depending on their background, age, and things like that. Some of them would be a little bit more hesitant or easily frustrated when it came to that side of things. And so I think I had to work to be more effective when it came to coaching that piece. But now I think I'm pretty comfortable coaching, coaching all of it and just maybe approaching it different. But yeah.
So, and then with going into the start, like what are some of the main things that you're looking for when you're first talking to an athlete or first starting to coach about what are some of the things that you really try to, I guess, isolate or looking to be able to improve?
Well, if we're talking about the start, for example, like I mentioned, pro day and high school kids getting ready for camps and combines and things like that. My initial thing is how they set up to start. I think that's a huge thing for a lot of kids, for a lot of athletes, is if they're not set up for success in the beginning, then it's going to be hard for them to make that up as they get going and moving forward. And so working with them just with their start position, and then I think as I've gotten further along and just coach more and more, I try to simplify things a lot more now, and then build on top of that as time goes. So initially, I'm looking at teaching them how to put force into the ground for horizontal projection and teaching them how to use their arms. And those are typically the first two things that we talk about. And I'll get a little bit more detailed and nuanced as we go, but just the basics, I want them to put force into the ground horizontally and then learn how to use their arms efficiently.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm big too on number based, right? So I'm always thinking how to be able to, or where do I need to be able to get to? And I've put a big emphasis into like first 4 steps, we need to get 5 yards, be able to get those 5, because it gives us a good understanding of, are we getting a horizontal movement like you talked about? Are we getting too vertical too early? And I think that when you're actually going and we actually get into performance time, just it's you and your body, and try to make it so you're the least in your head as possible, right? Let's not get too much into the mechanics of this, that, or whatever. Maybe if there's 1 or 2 things that you can kind of check off the list as you're going through your different phases, you can be aware of that. But for the most part, try to clear your mind the best that you can. But definitely on the training side, right, I think there's like 2 different mentalities where it's like when we're training, we want to be thinking about the nuances and being very specific in the places that we can control and control the controllables. And then when it gets to performance, it's a totally different mentality and totally different way that we approach it. And so do you have anything like that you're trying to think about in terms of the actions that they're trying to achieve?
I will typically, especially early on, I'll emphasize typically the first 3 to 5 steps. I'll use video, my iPhone to help them see what they're doing.
Yeah.
I'll use verbal cues, different things like that. But I'll typically emphasize that first 3 to 5 steps. And I feel like if we get that down pretty solid, it'll just set you up for continue to build that momentum and to continue to be successful. With younger athletes, I don't necessarily getting into like counting their steps for a particular amount, because then I have kids who maybe overthink it too much, and then so they start to change the way they run, where they start to like reach. forward, and so they're just kind of reaching out and their foot striking in front of their hip, and they change the mechanics of things because they're trying to get to this mark. So I try not to do that too much until I feel like I can trust that they're not gonna get crazy with that. But yeah, for sure, especially with the older guys, and I'm working with the first 10 yards. I'll use timing gates to try to give them some inspiration. And but also that first 10 yards, I'm looking at 6 or 7 steps in that first 10, and usually that's where I'll start, is trying to help them in street that first 10 yard when it comes to fares.
Yeah, yeah. And I definitely think that it's really important and I'd always tell people this and teams this, where it's like, if there's a part of your sprint that you can improve the most, right? The most common thing that you're going to be able to have the biggest impact on is going to be your start, right? Because especially when you get into the numbers and like the difference between running a 102 in a 10 yard, 1 second or 1.02 seconds, and 1 second flat is the difference between like an entire mile per hour in terms of what your top speed is. And as sure we both know, that's an entire mile per hour takes you a while to be able to build, especially when you're a little bit older of an athlete and you're trying to get those consistent improvements. Being able to add an entire mile per hour takes a little bit of time, where a lot of times with the start, it just has to do more with the timing and where it is you're landing, how that is that you're landing, what part of the foot, how we absorbing, little things like that, that ends up making a big difference. So yeah, and I mean, it's always time and place, right? There's certain athletes that are, you can tell, a lot more skilled from a understanding perspective, and this is where you get into the communication. I think that definitely, as I've started to work with different athletes and different people and people that have really good awareness and are able to take coaching really well and apply it really well, and how you can communicate with them in comparison to somebody that is more of a feeling type of a person. Yeah, just being able to kind of connect with different people based off of how well they're able to actually understand. And if you just get one little thing to be able to change, can apply that at so much higher of a rate and ability. So it's like just trying to hone in on one specific thing over and over and over again, where there's other athletes. I work with a lot of quarterbacks, and a lot of times quarterbacks, like, they're very looking for information. Like, they want more education. They're like, teach me. Like, you almost have to slow them down. Like, look, man, we need to get better at where we are now. Like, you still haven't even got this stuff down. Like, let's not try to go faster than well, we are. I know from my perspective, looking back, and I don't know if this is something that you went through as well. When I grew up, like, it was always about, if you want to get faster, hit the weight room. Like, you need to deadlift more. You need to squat more. Like, go in and figure out your speed by getting more strength. And now doing what it is that I do, I 100% think that strength is a part of it and something that you have to be able to build. And there's certainly athletes that can improve their speed by improving their strength, but there's also way more athletes that can get a lot faster by just getting more into the mechanics. And so just from your perspective, when it comes to training the 40-yard dash and or the 100 or whatever the case may be, how much of it do you put in training, and what type of like strength exercises do you really focus on in comparison to how much is it to?
Again, I think it just depends on the athlete and what their training history is and their age, because I've worked with such a wide range of age groups and those who are wanting to have the best 40 times or 60-yard time. I feel like for younger athletes, like, strength training is just like, if you get them a little bit stronger, it's going to help them. You start to expose them to just that time under tension and really whatever you throw at them, like, their body's going to respond a lot of times, and that'll help them out. So that's easy to introduce them to strength training, but in combinations for me, like with the mechanics for younger athletes, because their body's still growing and developing, and as they do that, sometimes their coordination gets a little off. I think just being able to be consistent with the mechanics of sprinting, I think that just makes them a better athlete in the long. For me, like younger kids, it seems easier to help them get faster. You just expose them to training principles, not necessarily that they have to back squat and bench and things like that, but even just lower level base stuff, and then get them to run fast on a consistent basis and work on the mechanics. They're going to see improvement happen with maybe older high school athletes or college and higher level athletes. I don't think the strength training becomes as much of a factor because typically the athletes that I work with, they're strong. They've been playing football or whatever sport for a number of years at that point, especially if they're football athletes. Like, strength training is a part of the culture. So
Yeah.
they're strong. Getting them stronger isn't going to be the answer for them. In fact, for some of them, they've gotten too strong, probably,
Yeah.
and in the wrong way, to the point where it's actually become a hindrance for them when it comes to their speed.
Yeah. And why do you say that? Let's hear the what ends up being the main thing why that ends up being a problem. Right? Too much strength.
Yeah, well, they're bulky and muscle weighs a lot, and it's hard for them to move it, and so they're just not moving fluidly, and they don't have the rhythm, and the coordination isn't there for them when it comes to speed. And then a lot of times, if they're always about developing max strength, they're moving that weight slowly, so they're not training their muscles to be explosive and what is fast twitch is what the parents always come to me and we got to develop their fast twitch muscles, but you're training their muscles to do the opposite, and that's the issue. Like, I think about football players, like, I'm always, in particular, I get a lot of linebackers that I'll work with, and it's a lot of times the same thing. Like, they're getting bigger, they're getting stronger, but there's no shoulder mobility, so because they're so big up top, and so they can't use their arms efficiently when it comes to their sprinting mechanics, or they built so much lower body strength that just their mobility and range of motion is limited, and so it hinders them and how they're able to move and set themselves up to be able to consistently apply force and to access just the use of their body for their benefit. And so, yeah, they look good and they kind of pass the eye test when it comes to that, but when it comes to the stuff that will keep them on the field or open them up to opportunities at the next level, they're not there, and the thing that they pursue oftentimes has worked against them.
I understand it because I also do a lot of strength coaching with different teams, and so it's almost like one of those things where how do you get the combination of both types of training, right? Because it's so easy to go overboard when it comes to like training the proper shin angles and getting yourself into that like acceleration and horizontal projection type of body positions, right? So your heels up and all your weight up onto your toes and being able to really isolate that type of strength, right? Because the squat, for instance, right? You're training yourself to be more back on your heels. You're training more of that mobility to just have everything back, right? But when it comes to acceleration, we want to be maximizing as much of your everything coming forward. And your first action when you're squatting is your hips are behind your head and your hips are really behind you the whole time. When it comes to sprinting, we want our hips to be as far forward as we possibly can. So ends up being two totally different coaching patterns. Now, there are a lot of similarities behind some of the angles with some like the knee bends and the hip bends and things like that. So there's benefit that comes from being stronger within the squat, but I think that being able to really get that to transfer over in the ways that it's supposed to transfer over ends up very easily be mismanaged. We could say that. And that ends up being a big thing. But a receiver that you ended up working with in the 2023 combine or maybe there's a couple of them that you worked with.
As far as the combine, there's a young man who played at West Virginia University, Bryce, for a reason. He's from this area, and I've worked with him. He comes home, he'll contact me, and we'll get some training in. And even before he went to college, I've known him for, I guess, 4 years now, or 4 or 5 years now. So I've worked with him, just kind of in between times, and primarily that's what guys are coming to me for is speed. Because I was at this speed school, I have the reputation as the speed guy. So
Yeah. I mean, do you feel
That's what they're
comfortable if we go into his technique a little bit? I mean, I have like the whole video here that we can take a look at that will show 40 and some of the things that maybe you have talked to him about or seen or things like that.
Okay, yeah.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and pop it up right here now.
Bryce was already a fast kid when I met him.
And that ends up being the case a lot of times, right? I mean, you're not going to be able to, especially when it comes to elite speed. I think that you can get somebody to be able to run in the 4.5s that might not have a great base when it comes to just sprinting, but once it comes into those low 4.4s, 4.3s, like you got to be a fast guy.
Yeah. He was in high school. He was definitely already pretty exceptional when it came to just other athletes his age when it came to his speed. And so it's been great to see him continue to progress over the past few years. A great performance here at the combine.
Yeah. And so was there anything that when you were starting to work with him that you really concentrated on when it comes to the start or any of the beginning parts of the movement here?
I think for Bryce, he's a great athlete, but he's just raw when I first met him. And so initially, I think it was a position of he tended to have like a anterior pelvic tilt. And so just trying to teach him how to or help him feel how to position his hips to change his leg action or how his leg typically would tend to, when he strikes the ground, kind of allow his foot or his heel to float up behind him.
And you're saying right here in that back motion right here, like at the beginning, or
right? So that left foot, when I initially met him, it would loop up pretty high behind him, and rather than being able to kind of drive that knee forward, you kind of bring that foot, and it would take longer for that foot to come back around to the ground, and he wasn't able to prepare himself like he is here. He didn't have the knee in place and that shin angle can prepare him to apply force into the ground effectively.
Yeah, I love it. And when you get into it, do you have any specific shin angles that you're wanting this to be at here?
So I usually will just start off when we get into just some initial training, and I'll just give them 45 degrees.
Yeah. That
should be a starting point, and there'll be some variation there. But I'll try to 45 degrees or maybe less with that.
And I know there's a lot of people that end up having different numbers that they look at and different abilities for them to be able to actually achieve. So, and when you're looking at this type of stuff, you're going in and obviously training somebody that's very fast and has a lot of things that are already, I guess, in some cases, God-given. We could probably say that. Where do you kind of draw the line, if you draw the line, on things that you want to be able to improve, right? And then where are you saying like, hey, look, like, there's parts of this that are going to be imperfect and let's not overcoach. Let's not get too critical, right? Because I know that ends up being even a thing that I'm playing with all the time. You get some guys that are fast and it's like, I don't want to make it so you are getting worse, obviously, by me trying to help you in correcting certain part of your mechanics. I want to be able to make certain things aware to them because I see it as a potentially injury thing too, where it's like, how you're landing here is, while I could see why it's a performance enhancement and why it's making you better, there's also some things biomechanically that are not great here. And so I don't necessarily want to change it, but we do need to put more emphasis into making sure your ankle is strong in this particular area, your foot's strong in this particular area, because you're definitely more at risk of a ankle sprain or a knee injury because of how you move here. So is there anything that you kind of play with there? I'm sure there is.
Yeah, I think that's the first priority when it comes to athletes, is we want them to be healthy so that they can participate in the sport that they're training for. So if there's anything that stands out to me that I feel like will compromise their health, then I'm definitely going to bring that to the table, and we'll put some work in to make some adjustments there, because if they're setting themselves up to be hurt, they're never going to accomplish their goal, which is to be on the field or on the court, whatever the sport is.
Yeah.
I think probably the next thing would kind of depend. Like if it's a guy we're training for combine or pro day, I probably don't have a lot of time, and so then I kind of have to pick and choose, because there's some qualities that I just don't have the time to really be able to effectively in that amount of time without maybe causing them to run slower than we need them to. For that. So like an athlete who's already at this point getting ready for the combine or pro day, I really emphasize that initial acceleration. We'll work on the start, we'll work on the first 5 to 10 yards, their body angle, how their foot is attacking the ground, their ability to apply force into the ground, and that kind of switching pattern is what I call it with their legs. So they're just being efficient with their movements and rhythm. And then as they start to stand taller and into more of that top end speed, just helping them work through the position of their hips. Some of them, their arms, and what I kind of just call arm action, kind of varies from athlete to athlete. Some guys, I think the main thing for me when it comes to their arms is that they are swinging through the range of motion in their shoulders. And some athletes who aren't doing that at all, the movement is more happening at the elbow. And so I don't think their arms are helping them at all. And depending on the guy, like some stuff doesn't look perfect necessarily, but if they're swinging forward and back and they're helping themselves build momentum and they're using that to their advantage, and even though it might maybe one arm is a little wonky out to the side or something like that, I just try to, I guess, case by case judge whether or not that's important to really dial in on to get them to change.
Yeah.
If it's something that's going to be a mental block for them and ultimately not be helpful for them in the time period that I have to work with them, then I'll maybe stay away from it, as long as it's not something that I feel like really want to emphasize because it's going to help them now.
So, yeah. I know. I get that all the time where people reach out to me and it's like, I'm not running a great 10. My 10, I'm running a 189 in my 10. Like, what do I need to do to improve my 10? And send it to me on like a Instagram DM or whatever. And I'm like, I have no idea. I have seen you run. Like, I'm assuming that you're spending a lot of time on the ground. So maybe do that or check to see how much distance you're covering. It's so specific from one person to the other. And you're right. I don't want to end up telling you something that makes it so you're worse. And I don't really know unless we could actually see it. And even, I mean, slowing this down too, I noticed one other thing too, where I love the head lift. So DJ Turner is somebody that he ran the fastest 40. I'm sure you're aware of him. And one of the things that I'm always, guys, is you want to kind of keep this chin a little bit more tucked as we're accelerating. And then the first thing he does is he lifts his chin. And so it's like, man, he just didn't help me out in that regard at all, right? And when I first see him, I see a similar action where he's kind of lifting his chin. But then when he comes through, he's really not lifting his chin. He's really in a pretty good position overall. So it's almost like that kind of head lift with the neck. It almost seems like more of the cue to maybe use, where it's like you're lifting the head. This is a great example of case by case where you see DJ Turner here, where does such a great job of getting that back leg and back knee all the way up and through, but is a little bit lower with his chest, a little bit lower with his arm, and is a little bit higher with his chin. Everybody's gonna have a little bit different situation, a little bit different case that's going to help them out. So it's kind of an interesting thing. And I know that's something that you can't really teach. And it goes into, that's what made me ask the question, like, where do you end up going and saying, okay, this is something that we need to be able to mechanically change, or something that you want to be able to, I guess, build off of and find the things that you can help to improve. So when you were working with him and looking at some of this stuff, I'm sure these are things that you noticed, certain things that stood out to you. What were some of the things, or what was something that you kind of focused on in being able to help him out as he got into kind of that drive phase, top end speed position like we're seeing here?
I mean, I think how you set yourself up in the beginning will help with that. So like you said there, in the beginning between Bryce and DJ, Bryce's chest will start to rise a little bit earlier than DJ's does. And that very well possibly due to their size difference will contribute to that. What I like about Bryce is that his spine is in alignment with his head position. And if I'm teaching somebody or working with somebody, and I want them to have good alignment with their spine, and then teach them to be patient and just know that they want to gradually rise. And each step, every time you hit the ground, you're going to rise a little bit and a little bit and a little bit. And I think for Bryce and many other guys, and this emphasis in high school, they're like, stay low, stay low, stay low. So they or to force themselves to try to stay down and to stay low. It works against them. They're off balance. They don't transition well out of that acceleration, and they start to just really develop bad habits. And what I'm seeing from Bryce here is that he's being patient with that with that rise, and it's being more gradual. I think Bryce trained, specifically his combine training, was down in Florida at a place called X, and I knew a couple other guys who also trained there. And what I saw in common between them was I really felt like they did a good job of helping teach that transition phase and helping to dial that in for these guys so that they're not having a wonderful acceleration first 10 yards and then kind of shutting their momentum off by transitioning upright too early. And for me, when I'm working with guys, I try to, again, that spinal alignment, don't try to look at the finish line right away. Look at the ground, maybe 2 or 3 steps in front of you, and then allow your eyes to gradually rise with your body, and just be patient with it. Don't try to rush yourself up to get going. Allow yourself to build that momentum, so that when you get to that top end speed, you're able to just carry that the rest of the way. And because some guys just want to get up and go.
Yeah,
and I understand that different athletes have different strengths when it comes to their running. Actually, yesterday, a young man that I was also a wide receiver that I was working with, really his upright running form is his strength, and he wants to get there as quickly as possible. And for him, the emphasis was working on being patient, continue to push through in your acceleration phase, because for your top end speed, we got a pretty good handle on that, and that's going to take care of itself.
Yeah.
You want to execute well early on so that you can enhance what you do well in the end.
Yeah, that's one of the things that really gravitated me towards the sprinting in general, is the kind of focus on the patience side, because I know for me, always had to kind of struggle with that when it comes to wanting to see success, wanting to see improvement, wanting to, even when I'm going through different exercises, I can be so impatient in so many parts of my life. And when it comes to sprinting, it is so much about patience and your ability to, and really no matter what the skill set is, because going off of your example of somebody that is really comfortable with the top end speed and wanting to get to the top end speed, made me immediately think with this athlete that I just started working with that 8th grade, he's going to be a great baseball player. He has a very bright future no matter what I do with him training wise, but I know that I'll be able to help him because he's on the opposite side of the spectrum, where he is so fast out of his first 10 that he is not putting himself in a position to be able to continue to accelerate and get into a great speed, because he just takes off so fast and it's just wild and not in a controlled manner. And so it looks great, and you definitely stand out, where it's like, man, that dude is fast and it's quick. But then when you start slowing it down, it's like, but there's a lot of mechanics here that are not great, and especially with baseball players running the 60, or I'm sure even you see this with like the 100, and this is where there's just so much respect for those elite level sprinters, because you have to be able to consistently build that speed all the way through, and it's a very, very controlled thing, especially for those people that have all that power out of the get-go, where it's like so easy within those first 20 to 30 meters to now start to hit a wall or start to lose control of the mechanics, right? It's like when you take off uncontrollably with your car, and then especially if you have a car that is not able to handle with the handling really well, you can get out of control really quickly. And you see that a lot with some of the most powerful athletes, where they can end up getting a little bit more or have a ton of really strong bursts, but not able to really sustain because of the lack of patience. And I love the thing that you said at the beginning, where with the why behind the what, right? With Eric, with Williams and what he was teaching you. And
I think that's the difference between, because I've worked with track and field and football athletes. Like the biggest difference with them is really the demand of the sport. Like training guys that run 100 meters, they understand, because they've been working through more just that drive phase or acceleration phase, and being patient with that and building that up. And that is their sport, and we have to train that in order for them to be more effective. When a football athlete, it's not a thing in the sport. It's really only when they have to do a 40 per day, because with football, like, you want to get to the spot as quickly as you can. It's crowded file. 10 yards maybe on a consistent basis, and you have somebody in front of you more often that's going to give you some resistance. It's unfamiliar to them because it's not a part of their actual sport. And so if you can, when it comes to the testing for the 40s, you can help them a little bit, then it's a success to me because it's just so out of their realm. But I also think that's why you see a lot of guys who run great 40s if they are track and field athletes in their past. And you can kind of tell it makes sense because they've also been sprinters and track, so that carryover comes when it's time for them to run a 40 a dash or to have that breakaway speed when they have their
Yeah, I agree 100%. That's what I mean. And we can maybe get a little bit into a quick little training thing and then maybe wrap it up a little bit with, I guess, some social media stuff. I know that was something that we talked a little bit about. And because one of the things that I do, I know every time, because I'm so much when it comes to just movement in general, it's like, how are we able to create the best rhythm and the best timing, right? We have to be able to create a system for having great rhythm and timing for us to be able to really improve as sprinters and being able to run fast. So it's always like building that up. And even when you're teaching somebody, like you're going into the arm swing, you could see when people start to change up the arms, and then that throws off that how they sync up with the legs. And so you have to be able to recreate that. So I'm always big on, I have a curved treadmill, and being able to give them the opportunity to, like, let's just build 80, build 90, build 100. And I'm always having them build up their speed on there. Let's look at the different parts of the mechanics as we're building, and let's continue to just work on our rhythm and our timing, and let's sync up the legs, let's sync up the body positions, and let's land at the right and create the force and be aware of all those things. And it's not about getting every single thing perfect every single time, but it's about being able to be aware and having that rhythm. When it comes to training, because you have alluded with it with the track guys, I mean, it's such a high demand sport, running even 100 meters, right? The quote unquote short distance, like running 100 meters is not an easy thing to do. You see people all the time that are like, oh yeah, I could do it. And they go out there and pull hammies halfway because they haven't really ran 100 in a long time, and they don't realize that the demand of it. I believe that it's like, if we can get you so your max speed is 23 miles an hour, you're going to set yourself way better to be able to run a fast 40, right? As long as we can get the acceleration. I trust my start training and my acceleration training. I know that we're going to be able to get you into a position where now the top speed is going to be what's going to make it or break it for you. So I want to build up that ability to have and achieve higher level top speeds. And so when you're going through your training with athletes, how much you focus on top speed and building up like their 10-yard split, and how much you put into the block starts and the starts, and how do you kind of program that, I guess, within a week, and maybe how you change it up based off of the demands of the athlete for that particular week or for that particular part of the year.
Quick sidebar. So you mentioned people feeling like they can run 100 meters really well and not really realizing how hard that is. I currently actually train out of a facility called the Strength Unit here in Raleigh. And so we just have a good group of coaches. We have great relationships, but it can get pretty competitive sometimes. So
Sounds like a great environment.
a couple of the coaches challenged each other recently to a 100-meter race, and naturally, because again, I'm just considered the speed guy. They're kind of talking to me about it and asking me. I'm like, I don't really think you guys understand how far 100 meters is. It's not going to happen as fast as you think it is.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to see that race, and it was pretty cool. They put it on social media and stuff like that. One of them has a big hockey background, and the other coach is more like football and lacrosse background. And just to see both of them, which I was actually impressed with how they did both of them. But it was just like 100 is not as short as you think.
Yeah.
I was actually scared that one of them is going to hurt their hamstring doing it. But they got out of it safely, so that's
good.
You brought up Feed the Cats and Tony Holler. I like what they're doing, and I feel like it keeps athletes, especially sprinters in particular, just motivated and excited about being a part of the sport. And I think we've probably failed just as a country, I would say, with our youth athletes when it comes to the sport of track and field, of being able to keep athletes engaged and enjoying it to the point that they're pursuing the higher level. And I think we can do a better job at that. We can see the results of that in years to come internationally. competing in Olympics and things like that. So I like their approach to it for sure. I don't have the exact same approach to it. The trail, the track and field. However, specifically with ice athletes, I do like to, especially early in the season, emphasize acceleration and working on the starts. Because again, for more inexperienced, less developed athletes, I think that's where we get the most bang for our buck at. And earlier in the year, I like to work more on that on the start and that drive phase a lot more often. And then as you get closer to like conferences and state meets, then we start to work on more speed endurance a little bit before we taper down and get into more peak over the peak things. But like with sprinters and over the course of the week, we'll typically probably have one meet per week, sometimes two. And typically those meets are going to be for like a Wednesday or Thursday for us. So on Monday, every week will be our more difficult days. If it's early in the season, like for example, a workout that I'll do is we'll run 200s. I typically will just put a range of three of my plan is like 3 to 6 200, or it might not even be 200. Sometimes I'll just do like 25-second runs where we'll run as fast as they can or as far as they can for 25 seconds. And I'll kind of base just how their running mechanics look and just with their level of conditioning, whether we cut it short of 3 reps or if we continue through to being able to hit the 6. And that, again, just depends on the athletes that I have, their level of conditioning and strength. But typically that Monday will be a harder day. The next day will be a little bit less demanding, where you should probably focus on more strict technical mechanics and not as much just really fast running. Tuesday, where we're not driving, but we're working on the more mechanics. It's a little bit more, I think, less intensity and impact on their bodies. And then Wednesday, more just preps of the meet. We're going to hold some block starts, a number of block starts, and veteran through that. The relay teams, we're going to get things in order with handoffs and things like that. A lot of times I find myself, especially with high school athletes, just talking through them about the mental side of as well. And the race, giving them tools and strategies on how to dial in and to focus and not allow themselves to be intimidated and be able to run their own race and just trust the training process. And then Thursday would be meet day. That day would kind of change for me. It would have fluctuated differently throughout the years for me, depending on the group that I have. If they run a lot of races in a meet, then it's more like recovery and mobility, because they've really taxed their bodies quite a bit, as I said before. If maybe they're running one race, still or two, I don't feel like it's been a whole lot for him. Then it'll be another training, not as intense as what Monday would be, but we would definitely add some stimulus to their body a little bit, because Saturday and Sundays are off for them, and I just don't trust high school students to do anything over the weekend without any supervision. So some of them are able to do that, but a lot of them won't. It's particularly in the environment that I've been coaching. Most of the athletes I coach at private school. Most of the athletes that are on the track team are not trying to run track in college, so that's not their primary focus. They might also be actively playing soccer, cross, or some other sport at the same time. Where they're at the schools that I've been coaching at for the past 5 years, they're heavy into fine arts, so they just have other obligations. And so I just don't expect them to be taking track during their weekend when there's these other demands along with their academics and so on and so forth. But like right now, that's probably what a week would look like. I'm a little more intense on Mondays, more technical on Tuesday. Wednesday is more like meet prep, maybe more mental preparation, and then we compete on Thursday and Friday, depending on what took place the day before. It's probably a little bit more medium intensity. I consider the meets as practice, as part of the practice plan until you get to more of the championships and the conference championships, state and things like that. And that just the details of the workouts change over the course of the year. Early in the year when they first come out, try to build their capacity. We're doing different types of skips and bounds and pops and things like that. And we might do some longer, less than maximal speed runs to try to build their capacity. And then as the season gets going, we focus more on that speed development or the acceleration training. And then we'll get into more speed development and endurance. And then we taper it down to the championship season.
All right, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, go ahead and like and subscribe. That really helps us out a ton. And if you have any questions, comments, recommendations, you can leave those down below. Thank you again for Coach Ian for deciding to do this and giving some great insight, I think, for both coaches as well as people that are looking to get faster, athletes that are looking to get faster. And I hope you're able to take a lot out of this particular podcast. If you want to learn a little bit more about what Ian does, you can check out the description down below. We also have some things about what we do at the Performance Lab California. If you haven't checked out any of our programs in the past, again, thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you soon.